I'm Greg Giuliano. I'm an executive coach, organizational change consultant, and author. I believe leaders have the power to shape the future and change people's lives. I also believe people who challenge the status quo and go beyond usual and ordinary are rare. They're willing to go to the edge and push farther, over and over again. When I find these ultra leaders, I love to talk with them. In each episode, I talk with ultra leaders to learn how they do what they do and how they keep growing as leaders. I promise you a full dose of ultra leadership from other ultra leaders just like you in every conversation. We're at the edge of another episode. Let's jump in. Welcome to another episode of Ultra Leadership. My guest today is Bob Dimicco. Bob is co-founder and CEO at Reveal.ai. Reveal.ai empowers leaders with actionable intelligence and insights, accelerating the process of moving from hypothesis to data collection to analysis and to action. I first met Bob and became a fan while he was senior director and GM of Cisco's Cloud App Discovery SaaS business unit, which he founded and scaled for Cisco. Bob is known for driving technical innovation and growth in best-in-class products, data and analytics, and SaaS cloud. He's a sought-after thought leader with real success in delivering profitable revenue growth and operational efficiencies by building high-performance global teams. But what I really love about Bob is that he takes being a leader of people seriously. Bob is an ultra leader. He goes beyond usual and ordinary to create the conditions for people to shape their work and achieve their best results. He's also got a recipe for toasted turkey pesto with mayo and spinach that I need to keep my wife happy. He's an avid basketball player who I'm guessing likes a certain Bay Area team known for tremendous leadership and teamwork. I am looking forward to listening and learning today. Please welcome Bob Dimicco. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Greg. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And indeed, I am a Golden State Warriors fan. I'm also a long-suffering Buffalo Bills fan, and somehow those two are a nice bookend.
Well, I have many friends in Buffalo who commiserate with you on how things ended this year, but we're all looking with anticipation of how things go, how things end up for the Warriors. What a team.
Yep.
Okay, so let's jump in. You're a lifelong learner. Let's give everybody a win out of the gate, and then we'll dive into stuff. What book are you recommending to people these days?
The book I'm right in the middle of is called Numbers Don't Lie by Vaclav Smil. It's a book that was given by one of my daughters at Christmas time. And, as a lifelong learner, what I find interesting about his writing, along with some of the Freakonomics stuff, is they find data that tells this really interesting story. Often it's a story that, may not be captured by the mainstream media, or it may be counter to our prevailing biases. And I like that because it kind of throws me for a little bit of a curveball, and it keeps me fresh and saying, look a little bit deeper. So yeah, Numbers Don't Lie. It's a great book.
So the look a little bit deeper, I love that. And that's important, I think, for leadership. And I want to jump to a question about leading change. And it ties, I think, to that as you're trying to enroll people and have them participate as you're growing an organization and trying to change things, you need that curiosity in order to do that, to be successful with that engagement work. So I'm curious, as a leader of change, and knowing that it's not a bug in the system, it's a feature in our systems, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned as a leader of change?
Probably the biggest lesson that I've learned is that leaders bring people along. Leaders help people see what's possible. When we think of communities of people that may report to you, or they may be your channel partners, or they may be your customers, you're going to find some that are early adopters. They're kind of change junkies. And those are the easiest ones to get on board. They love the vision. They're attracted to sometimes a shiny, sexy object. And that's pretty easy. The more challenging folks are the ones that sometimes are going to be the best to have on board, because they're the ones that can see around the corner. They can see implications. They can see challenges. They can see obstacles that sometimes you as a leader may not be able to see because, I'm a glass half full person. That's wonderful, but guess what? Sometimes that's not always the best attribute to have in a leader. So you really want, both of these folks to come along. And in particular for the people that are, kind of high verify, you have to earn their trust. You really have to ask yourself, what's in it for them? You really have to try to understand where they are and what their innate, motivations and drives are. And then, ask yourself very consciously, this is about change. And how do I reach them maybe at a head level or a heart level to help them take those first steps to what maybe for me is a compelling vision, but for them, maybe something that's a bit scary and concerning.
And that the data that we get from looking a little deeper with those folks who are hesitant or resistant might indicate something that we missed.
Exactly, Greg. One of the most powerful leadership workshops I ever attended was one at Cisco. And there was a gentleman who was, talking to all of us, high potential folks. And, somebody asked him, hey, what's the one piece of advice that we could all benefit from? And universally, whether we're in charge of a business or we're a sales leader or finance, what's one piece of advice? He said, be curious. He said, be curious, stay curious, seek to understand, because in that seeking and in that curiosity, especially as it relates to people, to the point you just made, the frustrations, ideas, concerns, obstacles of what have you of those people that are perhaps less innately ready to change, that will typically help you create a more complete story and ultimately just make your change more robust, probably faster because you're aware of that stuff from the beginning versus having it come up midway through the change.
Yeah. So I want to pull on that a little bit because this could be really helpful to a bunch of folks, especially senior leaders who sometimes they get into the room, right? The big room with the big fancy chairs. And they got in that room because they know a lot of stuff. And to be able to admit in that room that they don't know something, right? They become knowers, not learners.
Yep.
So that be curious, it's like you get to a point where, oh, I can't do that anymore. That's too much of a risk. So how do you contain that, maybe that fear, and still show up with curiosity when you're sitting in a room of senior leaders with the CEO or with the board, and still be curious? Because we kind of shut that. A lot of leaders get to that room and then they just turn that off because I don't want anybody to think that I don't know the answer.
Yeah. Well, let's break that down into two parts, and I'll describe my journey, which may be similar or different to other people's journeys. The first was when I saw people that I deeply respected with that kind of behavior. Ann Livermore at HP, got a chance to report to her in the early 90s. Gary Moore at Cisco. I can remember being in meetings with these folks. I can remember a meeting with Gary and John Chambers, getting ready for a board meeting. I was Gary's kind of chief of staff at the time. And I saw folks like Ann, John Chambers, Gary Moore. I mean, these were people that were running organizations that were multi-billion in size, asking these questions, saying, I don't know what this big customer thinks, but we should think about that. Who knows that? And there was this authentic vulnerability about them that, now we see someone like, Brene Brown talk about, and you can read about in books. And I saw these people doing it from a grounded place of confidence that I don't have all the answers. I know some members of my team don't have all the answers, but I know it's part of my job to go find those, whether it's myself or asking the right questions or whatever it is. So part one was I saw these people doing it and I'm like, well, these are paragon, type leaders. If they can do it, I can do it. So I began trying it out on kind of a smaller scale with that, question that kind of starts with, the leader being vulnerable. Hey folks, maybe I should know this, but I don't. Can someone please walk me through, XYZ technology or XYZ customer or what's happening in this country? And I tried that, some baby steps, Greg. What I found, not surprisingly, was in a month or so in chatting with people in the hallway or over Zoom, some of them would say, you know what, Bob, thank you so much for doing that because it gives me permission now with my team
Yes.
to ask those questions. And my team then says, you don't know how that's changed our relationship because now I realize it's okay in a meeting to say, I don't know, but I'll go find out. And so that was my own journey is, seeing some of these leaders. And then that gave me both the confidence and the examples to try it out myself. And
Right.
then a long journey starts with those baby steps. And then you go kind of from walking to running. And now for me, it's just part of the toolbox of leadership skills that I have.
I love it, right? So finding that safe space to practice, right?
Yes. Yep.
So if you're not on that kind of a team, to want to lead that kind of a team and model that for your people, and if you still aren't on that kind of a team, go find that kind of a team.
That's a great point. And who knows, maybe that team doesn't exist in your workplace right now, but it exists at your church or synagogue, or it exists amongst a parent teacher group, or it exists amongst, some other place in your life. I'm a big believer that if you're looking for something, the universe will provide. It may not provide what you're expecting and in the time frame you hope, but usually, you can find that community. And I love what you said, that safe place where you can practice and try it on for size and see how it works. Who knows? Maybe it's a family or something like that.
When you mentioned those two, I mean, brilliant techniques for practicing that. Hey, maybe I should know this. Like that kind of, maybe it's just casual line for you, but that's like a really great technique for someone who's practicing this as a way to ease the anxiety of showing that kind of vulnerability, of making it really casual. Hey,
Yep.
maybe I should know this, or hey, could somebody, or the two little tips that you gave, somebody's
Yep.
going to play this back and catch those. These are just great little linguistic techniques for practicing
Yep.
that kind of curiosity. And it can deepen a conversation, broaden a conversation, and totally change the dynamic for the group.
Absolutely. And, kind of going back to, change leadership. And I would assume, with the ultra leaders with whom you speak and have been on this podcast, that at different points in their careers, they took on assignments or were asked to take on assignments that something about it was new. Maybe it was a new business segment, maybe it was a new geography, maybe it was in a whole new industry or whatever. And they had to, summon a variety of capabilities to learn and grow and change themselves. And in that process, sometimes maybe that's early in your career and you forget that at one point you didn't have all the answers. You had to go around and ask people for help, but you figured it out. And okay, well, maybe you've got an organization of 500 or 5,000. You still shouldn't be expected to know all the answers. But if you're accountable for running that, you are accountable for knowing a certain essential characteristics of the business, the customers, whatever it is. But yeah, you don't have to be an encyclopedia to have all that stuff.
Yeah, you have to know how to get people together and figure that out, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So, what's the advice? So, when you're mentoring leaders, people who are joining your company, other folks that you meet, what's the advice that you most share?
Probably goes back to, as I was indicating, that leadership workshop at Cisco. Be curious, seek to understand, be authentically vulnerable, and just try to increase your self awareness, especially around reaching judgments. Because one of the things that I certainly see in myself sometimes, and I've seen in other, leaders sometimes talk about is, particularly when it comes to people, reaching judgments probably too soon or based on not enough data or behavioral points on, oh, so-and-so can't do that. They're really good at this. We should put them over there. And that, kind of going back to, at least for me, the type of leader I am that really is an entrepreneurial leader that helps people grow. Coming to judgments too early about what people can and can't do is sometimes it can just be fatal, especially for smaller companies, because you lose out on someone that could be incredibly talented. You just had them in maybe the wrong job.
Yeah. Well, and the curiosity when I'm looking at the person's performance, I think that encourages and it supports being empathetic, what's going on with that person, but it also takes you beyond that if you remember, oh, I hired this person because I'm pretty sure they could do this job.
Yep.
What's in their way? What is in their way? That it's an external factor
Yep.
that's contributing to their performance. It might not be the easiest answer is, oh, there's something wrong with the person. When you really extend your curiosity to what's going on with them and what's going on around them, oh, it might be something external that's beyond their control. That's a barrier that's in their way. Of course, they can't do their job. There's something in their way.
That's a great point, Greg. There was a HR business partner, Amy, in Cisco that I got to work with a number of years, and she had a wonderful way for coaching us leaders in sometimes those situations where you've got somebody and you literally are trying to understand what's going on. And her coaching was begin with conversations or sentences that go something like this. Hey, help me understand. Tell me what you see happening here. And then also using language like, here's my observation. Help me understand your observation. And that language is intentionally very neutral. It's not starting out with subjectivity. It's not starting out with judgment. It's starting out with, here's what I observe. I'm not making any conclusions yet. Here's what I observe. What did you observe? How did that feel to you? What did you experience? Because there's this kind of a basic, if you're looking at the person and kind of going, well, they're a pretty sharp cookie. We did a very thorough interview process on them, yet something's not going right here. Let's assume good intent and find out what great leaders do with those sorts of behaviors almost invariably is when they do uncover something that maybe they could do differently or the person could do differently or there's something in the environment that needs to change slightly and you get to a better place, that person is a fan of yours for life. The credibility and respect that you've earned with them, and especially in kind of smaller organizations. I've been in a lot of startups, whether it's a startup inside Cisco or our own startup now, Reveal. That's so crucial to building a culture that, getting back to change, people are willing to follow you or be led or go with you because that credibility and that culture is there.
Yeah, you've created that empathy and that connection with them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we all get in the way of our own success sometimes, habits that, I got to keep working on that. What's the way, if you'll go with me a little bit, what's the way that you sometimes get in your own way?
There's probably two that come to mind. One is the tyranny of the urgent. The tyranny of the urgent. It may not be important, but it's urgent. And let's face it, these days with all of the alerts that we're getting, like many of us, I have a love and a hate relationship with Slack. On the one hand, I couldn't see, doing my job or having the company operate without Slack. On the other hand, there are times when it's like, oh man, I can't find anything in Slack. But it does mean that sometimes we have to, or I have to try to, kind of turn my brain off to that. And, hey, I've got some focused, 60 minutes on my calendar because, there's something that is super important. It may not be urgent. I don't need to do it today, but if I don't, get moving on it, it's going to become a problem. So for me, part of it is the tyranny of the urgent. The other is a little bit more subtle, and that is when I'm up against something, and that something could be a person, it could be, something administratively, a convertible note, something like that, that's a little bit new to me. I may or may not realize right away that I am resisting it because it's new. Because for whatever reason, I'm not being as curious as I would like to be. It's wonderful in my talk track to hear, oh yeah, I'm always curious. Well, I'm not. I mean, there are days when, for whatever reason, I'm not at the top of my game. And what I've learned over the years is, to recognize when I should do that, but I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow comes, I'll push it off a little bit longer. Once that starts to happen, I begin to feel like, okay, there's a reason I'm uncomfortable about this. There's something that maybe I don't know that I have to find out, or maybe a part of the relationship where I haven't quite developed all the skills I need to have a win-win conversation or whatever. So that's when it tells me, hey, I need to lean into that. I need to tackle that. I need to schedule that. I need to have that conversation. It could be with a work colleague. It could be with a basketball partner. It could be with a family member. And that I can let that get in my way if I don't relatively quickly recognize it and say, okay, this actually deserves my attention and investment and maybe some preparation, because if I don't pursue it, it's going to ultimately be to the detriment of the company or a relationship or, whatever it might be.
Intentionally disrupting your status quo. Okay, something's
Yeah.
going on here. I got to pay attention to that.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. So I always like to end conversations with folks expressing some gratitude because it's good for our brains. It makes us feel better to express gratitude, to receive gratitude. So I'm going to thank you for being here in a minute, but I'd like you to say, what are you grateful for today? As you're sitting here, as we're sitting here having this conversation and you're reflecting on life, what are you grateful for?
There's two things that come to mind, Greg. One is there was a friend of mine many, many years ago, and she helped me start a very, very minute daily gratitude practice, which is, typically in the morning, I may spend, 10 or 15 minutes on a brief meditation. And part of that is, writing down the names of 3 or 4 people who in the prior day I am grateful for. Whatever it may have been. It may have been the barista at Pete's or a member of my family or, whatever it was. And just write that down and think about those people for a few seconds and just enjoy that moment of gratefulness and acceptance for what they, helped me in some way. The other one is, thinking about leaders and, obviously thinking about some of the topics we would cover today. It really got me thinking about leaders who, over my career, these were people who empowered me. These were people that created space for me to learn and make mistakes. And these were also people who held me accountable. I mentioned Ann Livermore at HP, Anne Hathaway at Cisco, Gary Moore, Parvesh Sethi at Cisco, and then Pete Newell, the former Army colonel and co-founder of BMNT. That was where this concept of Reveal was incubated before we came out of stealth last September. These are the type of people where I've learned so much from them. And when I have one of these opportunities to share, or even, when people ask me, hey, Bob, what have you learned along the way? Or who's some of the people that you've looked up to? These are the ones that I keep coming back to because there's so much consistency, even though they were different people in their leadership behaviors. And so I'm just so thankful that I got a chance to report to them or have them as sponsors, advocates, and supporters of mine.
We're going to leave it there. I am just so grateful that you took the time to be with us today. Yeah, every time we talk, I learn and I feel like, I'm better as a result of our conversation. So thank you very, very much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Greg. It's been a privilege.
If you're enjoying Ultra Leadership, please take a minute and give us a review wherever you find your podcasts. And please stay in touch. Sign up for our Ultra Leadership newsletter at ultraleadership.com. Now, before you jump to your next meeting, I invite you to reflect on what you heard today. What stood out for you? What insight might you want to incorporate into your leadership practice? Until next time, remember, as a leader, you always have the power to shape the future and change lives. So go to the edge and push farther. Thanks for listening.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.